So first of all, everybody be aware I'm sitting in a room with windows open, looking out onto the garden. There could be a bit of bird noise. There might be dogs barking as you go through this, so bear with us if we get a bit of background noise. But welcome all to our webinar on driving user adoption in Workday. To all the customers who are joining us, it's great to have you here with us. As Tony mentioned at the start, if you have any questions, please put them into that box on the webinar, and we'll do our best to try and answer some of those questions as we get towards the end of the session. If we can't answer all of the questions, we'll obviously come back to you as well after the event and answer those questions as best we can for you. If we have any technical problems as we go through this, bear with us, but we'll do our best to make sure that we stay on camera, that we don't have microphones being interrupted or anything like that as well. Hannah will not fall off her chair at some point as we go through this, so we won't have any bloopers as we go through this. There are actually a number of people on this webinar as well who come from the Workday ecosystem. And for those of you who don't know, the Workday ecosystem is a very collaborative one. So to all those other consultants joining us today, welcome. And we hope that you learn something new from this as we go through the session as well. We've got Hannah with us from Dentsu. For those of you who don't know Dentsu, it's one of the world's largest advertising, media and public relations companies. And Hannah was the key member of the Dentsu team who we were working with on the project we're going to be talking about today. Ildi, I think you found it a real pleasure working with Hannah because she's very robust, she's into her detail, she brings a commercial focus to HR functions as well. So Hannah's been a delight for us to work with as we've gone through this project. Now, Ildi, how long have we known each other for?
I'd rather not admit.
Yeah, Ildi and I would not really like to admit how long we've worked with each other, but I'm going to give it away. We worked with each other on an SAP project, I think about 20 odd years ago. Yeah. And Ildi was the lead on the training team on that SAP project and has been involved in loads and loads and loads of change management initiatives ever since then. Like me, Ildi got pulled into the Workday ecosystem, I think back in about 2015 or 2016, Ildi, would that be about right? Or maybe a bit later?
Approximately at that time, yes.
And since then, Ildi has learned a whole load about managing change in the context of Workday, both in terms of rollouts, but also adoption as well. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Cruz. I'm CEO of Change Associates and Prios. Change Associates is a technology agnostic business consultancy, and Prios is focused on Workday optimization. And it's probably worthwhile just saying a little bit about why we set Prios up. So during implementations of Workday, the focus is very much about getting to go live. And given the scale of challenge around managing the technical parts of a rollout, it's often the case that change management ends up being deprioritized in order to get to that go live point. And therefore you get adoption problems post go live on Workday. And even when you get into post go live and usage of Workday on a continual basis, you've got to be improving Workday all the time. You get 2 major releases given to you every year with Workday in every single organization. So you have to have an element of driving adoption when those releases come out from Workday. But the problem with those releases is quite often that most organizations only take the mandatory changes that you're required to adopt inside of Workday. So businesses don't tend to clear the backlog of issues that they've got as part of those releases, don't put projects in place to actually be able to improve Workday outside of the release process. And you end up then getting a problem that even if those things happen really well, there isn't a focus on the change management around the releases of the technology. So you don't drive the user adoption inside an organization. So a lot of that will come out as we go through this conversation around what we went through with Dentsu over the last few months. So let's get into the content. So if we move on to the next slide, Ildi, would you just give us a little bit of input into what we mean by user adoption, please?
So to make it really simple, what we mean by user adoption is, are your people using the system, yes or no? Because there can be technology and data and processes set up in a perfect way, which sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. But if nobody is logging onto the system and using these processes, then the investment was, well, money down the drain, basically. And the way that we are measuring adoption, you can see a few examples of dashboards and reports that we are running when we are looking at what the usage is of the system. We could look at the number of logins. We can specifically look at what pages, content, and processes are being accessed by various different groups of people. Who is initiating processes? Very often, only HR are initiating processes in Workday, managers and employees less so. So the more managers are initiating, starting processes, the better we believe user adoption is. And then we are looking at orphaned or unfinished processes. So that might be abandoned in the middle of the process, either because configuration issues or training, lack of training, people don't know exactly what to do or how to process, or a pure lack of adoption. So managers don't log on to complete approvals, and initiated processes are waiting for approval for days, weeks, months, sometimes. So that's what we mean by user adoption.
Okay, that's great, Ildi. Thanks very much. And I talked before about you and I work together on an SAP program, and you've done lots of SAP rollouts, and you've also been involved in lots of Workday rollouts as well. Just give us a little bit of a sense of why you see user adoption being important. You've touched on things like ROI in there as well, but there must be something from sort of the end user experience is really important in terms of adoption too. Just talk to us a little bit about that for a moment.
Yeah, so maybe if I look at this slide, and the conversation very often in my experience over the years in change management is there's always an option of doing nothing, as in doing no change management whatsoever. And by change management and adoption preparation, we mean engaging the right groups of people, having conversations, creating communication on a regular basis, and training people. And if none of that happens, the system can be switched on. But in this case, the only people who will really use the system are those that must use it for their day job. There is no other option, and they will learn using the system in quotation marks here intuitively, or rather with a lot of pain, because they have no choice. But in this case, some of the issues that we've seen is HR becomes an administrative function, and there is a very low effectiveness of providing services to managers and employees. Data corrections, because data isn't input in the system on a regular basis and there's no housekeeping, we are getting mass processing of data correction, and data cleansing and housekeeping needs to be a separate project with a lot more effort than it would have taken to introduce some change management for user adoption. And then where you have payroll attached to Workday, a lot of processes are completed offline with workarounds, or payroll is maybe driving the information that post-event gets put into Workday. So if we do nothing, you can still switch on a system, whether it's Workday or SAP, but you have a very, very sad organization with people who have no choice, and you might get attrition, and effectiveness of the people having to interact with the system will be very low.
And actually, your point about payroll is really well made. The number of customers we've come across where they want Workday to be the system of record, but Workday can't act as a system of record because adoption isn't high, and therefore you don't have accurate information in there. So the organization tends to go to payroll and use payroll data as a system of record, which is the wrong way around in terms of the way you want things to be as well. I'm assuming you've come across that a number of times as well.
Absolutely, yes.
And Hannah, why was adoption so important for dentsu? Just give a bit of input on that one, please.
Sure. And I guess for me, if we're not talking about adoption, there's literally no point in talking about anything. Exactly as Ildi says, you can have a system in place, you can have a new process, you can have a new behavior, a new way of working. If people don't do or use or be in a different way, there's literally no point in doing any of it. So adoption is the number one importance for anything that we're talking about when we're doing a project. And I think for us at dentsu, so the project that we're going to focus on here was about utilising Workday for our annual salary review and bonus cycle. So paying staff correctly, that was almost like our number one goal. That had to be right. But as Ildi mentioned, I think working on this project really highlighted other areas that we needed to focus on as dentsu. So that data accuracy is a huge one for us. So at dentsu, we utilize Workday as our sole people data source. And if that wasn't right, and a lot of it wasn't right, it meant that we weren't getting the benefits of that system. So we weren't having accurate reporting, accurate management information, which meant people then didn't trust the system, which isn't a great starting point. But I think adoption is also, we're obviously talking about system a lot because we're utilizing Workday, but adoption is bigger than that, and it was for us in this project too. So for us, it was a lot about behavior change. So who's making those salary review decisions? How are they doing it? And we tried to, and we'll talk about this a bit later, but we're trying to shift that responsibility to managers. Managers should be responsible for making some of those decisions about their employees, and therefore taking it away from HR, which then helped people to view HR less as the payroll monkeys in the background who are just, doing all the admin stuff, but to actually advising as a kind of strategic partner on, salary and benefits. So yeah, adoption, number one thing, is the most important thing for us.
Great, excellent input. Thanks, Hannah. Okay, let's go a bit deeper then. So move on to the next page, and we'll give us a bit more information about the background to dentsu and the challenge that you faced in this year and what you were doing.
Sure. So for those, I know David's given us a bit of an intro about dentsu already, but for those of you who don't know us, we're a global advertising and marketing firm. We've got around 65,000 employees across 145 or so markets or countries. We've actually grown by acquisition, which means we are a particularly complex business because we haven't always integrated those acquisitions. Sometimes by design, it's part of our kind of go-to-market strategy, but sometimes just because we haven't and we should have, which means we are a really complex business with a myriad of processes, operating models, systems, ways of working, capabilities. So really complex. And you might have seen in the news last year, we kind of announced that we will be having much closer alignment to our group company in Japan, which we call the kind of move to one dentsu. So moving towards a kind of one dentsu strategy, culture, operations, ways of working, both with Japan and within our international business. It's obviously no surprise, I think everyone's doing this, but we've been going through lots of different transformation activity over the past few years. And because people are what we sell, we have to take a people-centered approach to the way in which we manage that kind of transformation. And having a kind of global, competitive, equitable reward strategy is absolutely fundamental and a critical foundation for this kind of one dentsu future, to making sure we retain the talent that we need across the business. And so this project that we're talking about here is really all about utilising Workday for that annual salary review and bonus cycle. This is not the first time that we tried to do this on Workday. Actually, I thought last year would have been the last. We've had huge amounts of challenges. So we actually rolled dentsu out nearly globally about 6 years ago. But we've generally had some low levels of adoption, both amongst HR and our managers and employees across a number of our countries. So when we tried to utilise Workday to do this salary review, previously countries have just opted out. It was too difficult. It was felt that people didn't know how to use the system in the basics, let alone to try and do it for something like this. And the levels of support that managers and HR would need was just too great. So that was a real challenge for us in thinking about how we're going to do this in the future. But because we've also grown by acquisition, we've had multiple approaches to doing this. So different timelines, different views of who's in scope for a salary review and who isn't, using different processes to do that, different people making decisions, and different ways of managing the budgets. So we have a kind of matrix structure, which can make things quite tricky sometimes. So that was really challenging. And all of that just led to a really poor user experience for both HR and the managers who are doing this previously. So if you imagine you're a manager of a global team, you've got 20 people across 10 different countries. Previously, you would have had a different task for every single one of those individuals, but not all of them were on Workday. So you were also doing it offline. And then poor HR in the background was having to consolidate it all. So it was really messy, and we got a lot of complaints.
So not much by way of a challenge then, Hannah. It all seemed pretty straightforward and simple.
Yeah,
then.
Totally fine. I don't know why we were worried.
So give us a little bit of input about the objective and what you're trying to achieve then. Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
So definitely fewer complaints. That was ultimately what I wanted. I wanted people to be happier. But in all seriousness, we knew that we couldn't have the same again. It had to be better this time. So our big kind of mantra throughout this whole project was one approach, one timeline, one system. So we were trying to be much more global and much more robust. And we wanted every market, every country to be utilising Workday to do this, unless there was a really, really good excuse. So that was really our mantra, and we wanted everyone to be using Workday. But more than just using the system, it was also, as I talked about previously, we wanted to shift the way that our managers behave in the organisation. We want to get to a place where if you are a manager, you have a huge amount of influence on someone's career, and therefore you should have influence over what they're paid and what their bonus is. We're not quite there yet, but we wanted to kind of shift the organisation to that way of working and that culture. To drive greater levels of managerial responsibility, but also to allow then some of that admin work to be taken off HR. So that was a huge cultural shift for us. And of course, with all of that, we wanted, we want people to stay in the organisation, we wanted it to be a good experience. And we had to do it in a really tight timeline. So I think we kicked off the project in about September, and all of the proposals done by managers had to be submitted by kind of mid-February. I think it was Valentine's Day, a nice little Valentine's Day treat for everyone. So yeah, it was a super quick time frame considering the amount of work we had to do and the amount of challenges we had to overcome.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about why you needed external support to help you with all of this.
I think that timeline was a crucial one. Like, we knew we couldn't do this with the amount of people we had and the amount of other stuff that's always going on in the business. So we needed more bodies, but it wasn't just about more resource. We needed people who had great Workday expertise, because we knew that the process and the experience had to be better than last time. So definitely we needed Workday experts, but we also needed experts in change management, because we were going to approach this in a new way. So yes, it's global. Yes, it's one approach, one timeline, one system, but we needed to recognise that not every country was at the same position. And we had to meet people where they were at. And so therefore we wanted to be more resourced and be able to provide more support than we ever had before. So we absolutely needed change management experts who would be able to complement our own in-house change team and our own HR stakeholders. And I don't think we'd have done it without Prios helping.
That's good to hear. So Ildi, I'm going to ask you a question about that 100% adoption of the Workday processes. Just talk to us a little bit about how you felt when you saw 100% adoption, given the context that Hannah's just given us as well about the challenge.
It was an incredible effort, and I think in my whole career, I have never seen such coordinated effort together and such intention from every single person across the board of making things happen. And I think what worked really well is that we created a cadence of meetings and interactions that went beyond what I've seen. So the amount of interaction with the key sponsors who needed to help drive was amazing. The number of representatives from the various different regions and service lines that were put forward was extremely generous, and we have worked with people who really had influence in the various regions and markets. So the team that came together was willing to be guided, to be helped with how to have conversations. We've had some very sensitive conversations with a lot of sponsors and got through dialogue to a place where, despite the complexity of the organization, the vision that was set globally trickled down to all of the right levels. And I think the pain from the previous occasion was so big that the solution that we offer, so this is not just about the change management effort itself, but the functional team in Prios has helped to create the technology and the processes in a way that addressed the problems from the previous years. So all of that together was an incredible team effort. And when we talk about one team on a project, often it's just words. Here we really lived it every single day.
That's great input. Thanks, Ildi. So,
yeah.
Hannah, let's move on to success criteria. I'm a big believer in what gets measured gets done. So do you want to talk us through the success criteria you set for yourselves and the project?
Absolutely, and that's actually a real learning for me. When we started scoping out this project together, we kind of all knew what we wanted to achieve. We wanted, everyone to use Workday, we wanted a better experience, and we wanted to provide more support. at the very beginning, we didn't actually outline all these criteria. We did it kind of halfway through the project. And that's a learning for me. Next time I'm doing it right at the very beginning, because as you said, David, that means everyone is absolutely fixated on making sure we achieve these things. And all of our senior stakeholders know what we're going for. But we did do it and we got there. So there were 3 things that we really wanted to measure and what kind of defined success for us. One is adoption. So did people do it? Did people do the task? And not just did people do it, but did the right people do it? The experience, we talked about that, was the experience of doing this in Workday better than they've had previously. And then finally, ability and support. So did the people who were involved in this, so both HR and our managers, know what to do, and did they feel supported throughout? So we then defined some kind of quantitative criteria that we could measure. We won't go through all of them. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. But across adoption, we wanted to make sure that people completed the task by the deadline on Valentine's Day. We wanted to increase the number of countries that were doing this in Workday, and we wanted to increase the number of managers that were doing this in Workday compared to previously, so rather than relying on HR. On the experience, we kind of talked about the fact you'd have 1 million different inbox items to do previously, and we wanted to remove the number of tasks and process steps people had to go through to make it a better experience. And then finally, around ability and support, we wanted to both drive higher levels of self-service across the organisation. So we created a kind of self-help hub in previous years, and we wanted to increase the traffic to that. But we recognised that we needed to take a tailored approach, and so therefore we wanted to make sure that we had trainings run for each kind of country or population group. So we're measuring training attendance and readiness levels too. So just through simple surveys in some of our training sessions and engagement sessions, kind of asking the question, how ready do you feel to do this, and what else do you need to kind of feel fully prepared? So those were the key things we were measuring from a quantitative point of view. And like David, I'm like you, I like to see the hard data and facts in front of me, because I know that we've done it or we haven't. But actually the qualitative data is super helpful as well. I mentioned a lot of complaints previously when we tried to do this. So it was really important for us that we spoke to those people who had a poor experience previously to understand whether we had done better this year, both in terms of the actual experience of doing it in Workday, but as also the support that they'd received, and looking at both across HR, who often have the hardest time doing this, as well as our managers and some of those senior stakeholders. So a whole bunch of stuff, which was fun.
Okay, so talk us through, how did it actually go? So what were the results?
Thankfully, pretty good results, or else this would be a very bad webinar for everyone to be attending. On adoption,
and we didn't massage the figures either, Hannah, did we? We didn't change them just for the webinar.
I promise. So we had 96.7 of our annual salary review and bonus proposals submitted in Workday by the deadline. Obviously, I'd love it to be 100%, but I'll take 96.7. That's not bad. Even more importantly, we had 53 markets rather than 19 markets do it last time. So we had 34 new countries doing this process on Workday. And then even more importantly, we had, I think it was an increase of around 145% of managers doing this in Workday compared to previously. And that 4th bullet point for me is almost the important under that adoption section, which was over 83% of the submissions were done by a manager, rather than sneakily getting HR to do it in the background, or HR having to take over to do it because a manager wasn't doing it. So that points for me to that behaviour change that we were trying to drive. Experience, 1 inbox task, that was like our goal from the very beginning. We knew that was what we wanted, and we achieved it, which made it just so much simpler for people. But more than that, I think we really made massive improvements in the kind of visualization and how it felt to do it on Workday. So if you're going in as a manager, you'd see, a proposal in there for your employee, and you could tweak it, and then you could see what that did to your overall budget in quite a visual way, which I think really helped people who have big teams and were struggling. You've got a budget of this much, and then you're tweaking people here and there, and being able to see what that did as a whole was got really great feedback. And finally, on that kind of change management side of things, we definitely drove more people to that self-help hub. So like nearly 11,000 visits to it versus a meager 200 visits in the previous year, which is great.
That's a significant shift in numbers, isn't it?
I hope it wasn't just me visiting it over and over again. But then, and we talked a little bit about having that much more tailored approach to change management. And so we had over 90% of our HR audiences attended the training that we ran for them over like several weeks across lots of different countries, different time zones. And over, I think, an average of 60% for our managers actually attending training. I was like, that seems quite low. And Ildi assured me that apparently 20% is the average. So we absolutely smashed it. So it was great to see. And I think that just really points to, the kind of really tailored approach that we were trying to take, even though we're trying to do a kind of global one system, one timeline, one approach.
Okay, so a great set of numbers. What about the qualitative measures? What did you find in terms of qualitative outcomes?
Again, I think some really positive things. We've put the positive things in there, and there were definitely things that people said we could improve on, which is equally important. And that's stuff that we're taking forward as we do this again this year and in future cycles. So super important. Overall, though, there was really great feedback. I think people pointed to the really high quality training content, the demo videos, the step-by-step guides, the training decks, and that we really have Prios to thank for a lot of that content. I think that localized approach we've just talked about, so meeting people where they were rather than just assuming that they could get to where we needed them to be, and doing a bit more hand-holding than perhaps we'll do in the future, because now it should be easier. I think my favorite quote is that one. It's right at the bottom, and apparently the French CEO, he's obviously got pretty big business below him, and he kind of did this in Workday, and he said just 2 clicks, amazing, it's that simple. And so that again just shows without having a good experience and without the thing itself being good, you're never going to drive adoption. And I think we really improved that this year, which is great.
Okay, really good input. And actually, qualitative measures are just as important as quantitative as well, because when you get that quality feedback coming back from the business, it gives you an indication that actually you're making a behavioral shift because of what people are saying to you as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's move on to the next page. Talk to us a little bit, Hannah, about what you got from your external support from us. Did you get what you needed from Prios? Please say yes, because if you say no, we're going to be very upset.
It's super awkward now. I'll never be invited back. No, absolutely. I think I've mentioned already the scale of resource that we needed to drive this, both from a technical point of view as well as from a program point of view and our change management. I think that was amazing. We wouldn't have been able to do the amount of work in the timeline that we did without that. But it was also the expertise. So we were able to put, really seasoned change leads into some of our most complex markets and regions, and really have them handhold some of our senior stakeholders. And as we said, kind of tailor and design a change management plan that would get them from their potentially very low levels of Workday capability all the way up to feeling comfortable to doing this, and making those behaviour shifts as we went. So a whole bunch of detailed information. And Ildi touched on it before, but I've been a consultant, so I've worked on the consultant side, and now I'm a part of dentsu. I've worked on the in-house side, and on this project we also had EY working in some of our countries. But to me, it never felt like it was Prios and dentsu's project. It was one thing. We were one team working towards these really clear goals. And as Ildi said, we kind of set up ways of working and really like honest conversations with each other about and sharing ideas. Sharing worked really well in Germany versus Singapore. And so having that like one team approach was wonderful. And I don't think that always happens. So I feel really it was just a great success story for us.
And Ildi, in the context of the dentsu project, what advice would you give to someone facing user adoption challenges?
So just circling back to a lot of things that we talked about before, I think one of the most important things is that the usual 3 elements, people, process, technology, and within that data, all need to work together, because without the people on the journey, technology can be as good as it can get, it won't be used. But without some of the changes to the experience itself in the system, we wouldn't have been able to bring people with us. So that constant collaboration between the people side of the business and then the technology is very important, and that has gone extremely well on this particular project. The other very important thing is what we touched on with the qualitative feedback, is to listen and have a dialogue. So we have not been broadcasting messages, this is what's coming, take it or leave it. We've had some very deep conversations that went way beyond just the annual salary review. This program has had spin-off mini projects that are now launched at dentsu to look at some of the issues that we have uncovered that came out of the conversations, came out of the deep dive into the resistance from various different stakeholders. So that conversation is extremely important. And then having sponsorship on various different levels, not just from those who initiate the program itself, but sponsorship from country leadership and regional leadership, again, comes from the dialogue, understanding what Hannah said, meet them where they are and find solutions and find ways of taking them on the journey in that place where they are. So the Americas needed a lot less support. The conversation was about, we know you might be getting a little less than what you've had in the past, but we're going to get everybody to catch up. Whereas in some of the other countries, we've had, not quite illiteracy problems, but we have half an HR person supporting hundreds of people. So we've had resource issues, and the way that people were operating didn't automatically mean that they were logging onto computers. So we've had a very wide variety of issues that we've addressed with dialogue, and I think that is one of the most important things. And then lastly, change management is not a one-off thing that is done when the project is over.
Absolutely.
It is a persistent, consistent, and measured, realistic way to chunk down activities that need to be done and steps that need to be taken, because this process is going to come up again this year and then again next year. So listening to the past feedback, showing that when we are listening to feedback, we are going to do something about it, which is very important as well. And then making the changes that will make a difference. So not try to address everything and not try to change the tools, but really start honing in and have an iterative process with the conversations. And longer term, I think that's what's going to make dentsu very successful, because there is a team growing internally to learn continuously and improve the way that the rest of the business is engaged.
Okay, great input. Thanks, Ildi. Okay, so we've had a few questions come through and we're over time a little bit, so I'm just going to focus in on a few. So I'm going to ask you a question first. I'm going to be selfish, actually, and I'm going to ask you the question I hate being asked as a change manager, okay? But I'd like you to both try and identify one thing that was done on the project that you think really helped shift the dial on adoption. So my favorite, when I listen to both of you talk, is the self-help hub. I think that's a brilliant idea to really help people to sort of get used to what they need to do inside in a process like this. But Hannah, maybe could you pick one and say this is the thing that made a big difference?
I think probably clear sponsorship and a huge amount of engagement with the leaders. Dentsu is the kind of business, I'm sure, like many others, where if a leader says we're going to do something and they really believe it, the rest of the people will follow. And so we spent a lot of time making sure that we had, well, we did have an amazing sponsor in our global reward director who, managed conversations at the very executive level. So it absolutely flowed from there, and working really closely with leaders across each area of the business to drive the right messaging and make sure they were comfortable, so that it would flood more easily down through the rest of the organization.
Okay, so all about sponsorship for you. Ildi, what about you?
For me, one of the big questions is always around resistance, and my favorite thing that we did on this project is we didn't say to those who resisted or anyone that you must use Workday no matter what, because our way of working will be Workday. The message was, we want, this was the vision, we want a global, unified, single process. And we've looked at the cost, the pain of doing that in Workday, and where it was just not possible, then we found a workaround temporarily, and we built a roadmap for those who couldn't make it this year to do it maybe next year. And that kind of measured, rational approach that reduced resistance big time. And I think that is something that dentsu do really well, is having those conversations.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so a good question here. Have you spent most of your efforts on manager engagement with this system, or how have your efforts differed for engaging employees? So Hannah, maybe give us a bit of a sense on that one, because this process was primarily about managers doing what they need to do inside the system, wasn't it, more than it was for employees? Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. So this actually, in a weird way, even though employees were ultimately impacted by it because they were getting a pay rise or not, it was all really managers and HR who kind of did stuff in Workday. I do think it's a great question. We're thinking a lot about how we better engage our employees and drive higher levels of self-service across the organisation. And I think it's probably similar to the approach that we took for this project. I think it has to be kind of local. It has to meet people where they're at, with an understanding that employees everywhere don't necessarily use Workday that much, and maybe they only use it a couple of times a year or to log their absence. So I think it has to be, for a big and complex organisation like this, we might have some ultimate criteria that we want to meet, some adoption success criteria, but the way in which we get there has to be fairly tailored, and meet different employees where they are, which is tough. It means it's always trickier. It's always going to be more effort. But yeah, and I think the other thing you mentioned at the beginning, David, was we do quite a lot of improvement to the system on an ongoing basis, and we do make sure that we have good change management to support those changes. So that's something we're also really driving home. I think change management, as everybody says, is not just done at the end of a project. It's like a continuous thing that we need to be focusing on.
Absolutely great. Thanks, Anna. Okay, I think we've got time for just one more question. So Ildi, probably one for you. How long did it take to prepare the handbook and toolkit before rolling out across the region? So somebody's obviously trying to get a sense of the amount of effort required to get that training content and hub content ready. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So of course it depends on how much the content is, but we've created 3 different types of tools. We've had step-by-step guides, which were basically Word documents with screenshots and text. And we also created 2 3-minute long demo videos, which basically are a show and tell with a voiceover to explain what needs to be done. For this particular process, we had 4 step-by-step guides and 4 videos. So the total time to actually, the net time to create these took about 2 weeks, but all the preparation to make sure that the content was right that went into it, to set the context, and to start creating a fertile ground on which we could place this material. That was what took a long time, deciding how do we present this information to make it as usable and as easy to access as possible. So the net creation of the actual material, once everything else was done, didn't take very long, but the creation of the material was maybe 20% of the time that we spent outside the preparations.
Great, excellent. Thanks, Ildi. Okay, we're out of time, or pretty much out of time. So let me just close out, first of all, by saying, Hannah, thank you very much for giving us your time and for getting us through the content today and for your partnership over the course of the project. Ildi, thank you also for giving us the time today as well. And I also want to give a shout out to Vanessa, who was helping in the background, who did a lot of the work that we were talking about today as well. So Vanessa, well done to you for all of your great work as well. To everybody in the webinar, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording afterwards, and you'll be able to come back and ask us questions as well. We didn't get some questions today, so we'll go back to people individually and try and answer those questions for you as well. There is, when the link comes out, also an opportunity to grab some time with Ildi next week. If you want to spend a bit of time talking to Ildi, take up the option of booking one of the slots that will be available for you to talk to Ildi next week as well. And with that, thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you again to our speakers, and hope to see you all at some point soon. Okay, take care then. Bye-bye.
Bye.